Today, we've got the original BigFoot in the shop. It's the truck that started the monster truck craze nearly 40 years ago, and we're using our overhead crane to reinstall its original blown 640 big block. After nearly 30 years apart, BigFoot will roar again with its original monster power plant. It's all today here on Truck Tech.
Hey guys, welcome to Truck Tech. Well, today we've got something very cool, unique, and obviously huge in the shop today. This is the original monster truck, BigFoot #1. Now, just to get it through our shop door, we had to take it off of its giant and heavy 66-inch tall monster truck tires and put it on these relatively small tires. Now, the reason it's here is so we can drop in a new engine. What you see on the engine stand is the original 640 cubic inch big block that powered BigFoot back in the day, and it's been rebuilt by the guys in the engine power shop. The foundation for the build is an aluminum Allen Root Ford Racing block, and it's topped off with a pair of Allen Root aluminum Hemi-style heads. The gasoline and air mixture is lit off by an MSD magneto that was set up by the guys at System 1, and, well, this giant belt is not for turning an alternator. It's to turn this giant polished supercharger that's been freshened up by the guys at Blower Drive Service. Sitting on top of it are 3 massive Predator carburetors. Now, this combo on top of the engine is good for about 20 pounds of boost and about 1,000 horsepower, and that is without any nitrous. Now, in between the freshened up 640 cubic inch race engine and BigFoot's huge heavy-duty military-grade transfer case is just a Ford C6 3-speed automatic transmission. Nothing too exotic, which is kind of surprising since BigFoot probably weighs around 15,000 pounds and everything else is custom or oversized. Now, the guys at BigFoot typically build their own transmissions in-house, but we figured since we're installing a rebuilt engine, we might as well install a new transmission as well. So we gave the guys at TCI a call, and they put together this custom-built trans just for our application. Now, like I mentioned, this is custom-built, but it's based off of their Super Street Fighter Ford Big Block trannies, rated at 875 horsepower. This one features a deep cast aluminum pan, a full manual valve body, a billet servo, and high-energy clutches, along with a handful of other upgrades. Now, in addition to the trans, we also picked up one of their Street Fighter torque converters. This one has an anti-ballooning plate, thrust bearings instead of washers, it's computer balanced, furnace brazed, and it has the smaller diameter crank pilot to match our aftermarket crankshaft. The first thing we're doing is filling up our converter with TCI's Max Shift Performance Transmission Fluid. And after making sure the input shafts were in the correct spot, I installed the converter, rotating it while applying a little bit of pressure, making sure the torque converter is fully seated. Cool. There we go. Then we added the separator plate. And since Summit Racing is a longtime sponsor of BigFoot, we went to them for our Meziere SFI-approved billet Flexplate. Installed it and torqued the bolts to 80 foot-pounds. Then, using our crane, we floated the transmission into position, loosely installing the bell housing bolts while making sure that the torque converter studs were poking through the flex plate. Then, I tightened up all the bolts. Oh, this thing is ridiculously huge. And to get this aluminum V8 high enough so we can install it in BigFoot, there was only one tool in the shop capable of getting that job done, and that's our overhead Kundal crane. We couldn't have done this job without it. And believe it or not, wrestling this huge engine and transmission into place while over my head was a one-person job. You can't do that with a cherry picker. And after climbing all over this thing, lifting, strapping, pushing, and pulling, I was able to wrestle this engine and transmission combo into position. Come on. It was a little bit easier than I thought. All right, it's home. It's been a while, probably 20 years since this engine's been sitting in there. Now, the next thing we need to do is get some exhaust on this thing. Now these headers came to us with the freshened up engine, and I'm pretty sure they are the original headers that were initially installed with the 640. They've got 2 1/4 inch primary tubes, a 4-inch outlet, and I assumed they were some hand-built headers, but it's got Hedman headers and BigFoot stamped right into the flange. So at the very least, we know we've got the right ones. Now to seal the headers to the heads, they don't use gaskets. They just rely on some Loctite high-temp copper silicone to get the job done. A bead around each port is more than sufficient. And this stuff's good up to around 700 degrees. Cool. And to secure the headers, I'm using some nice ARP 12-point header bolts. First, I ran the bolts in and snugged them down, and then I did the final tighten by hand. That way I can get a good feel for it and won't risk over-tightening these small bolts. Then I can move on to installing the transmission dipstick and pinning it down using one of the bell housing bolts. Then I can reinstall the heavy-duty transmission cooler lines. Dun, 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 dun.
After the break, we'll add the supercharger and install the drive shafts. And later, we'll start this monster. Stay tuned.
Hey guys, welcome back to Truck Tech. Well, we're in the middle of reinstalling the gargantuan big block that Bob Chandler and his team at BigFoot dropped down in between the frame rails of this old Ford some 35 or 40 years ago, way before monster trucks and BigFoot were household names. Now we've got the engine bolted to our new transmission and locked into place. And we've reinstalled the original headers that first were bolted up to this giant engine. Now the reason it makes so much power is not just because it displaces a monstrous 640 cubes. It's also because it's got a big old supercharger strapped to the top of it, cramming air into the cylinders. After installing the manifold O-ring and gasket, I can start lowering this polished power adder into position. Now to handle this thing, we're using the Pit Pal engine hoist that we picked up from Summit. And I've got it bolted to the supercharger, so that's preventing me from fully installing this thing or lowering it into position. So I'm going to set it on a couple of pieces of 2x4, remove the straps, get the crane out of the way, and go recruit some help. Ready? Holy crap.
All right now.
Feels like you've got most of the weight, Pat.
Just trying to go nice and easy.
Right. All right.
Success.
That wasn't so hard.
No. Right there's 100+ pounds of blower.
Yep. Thank you, sir.
You bet.
And with that done, I can secure the hardware that holds the blower in place. Being careful not to over-tighten it. They are aluminum studs after all. Then I can add the blower drive belt and tension it. Now it needs to be good and snug, but not guitar string tight. It's got to have a little play in it. Probably good. Then using the 1/2-inch drive on the front of the blower pulley, I can finally roll the engine over so I can gain access to the 4 torque converter studs. All right, there's one. At least I can see through the starter hole. Kind of convenient. Then, one at a time, I can tighten up the torque converter nuts that have seen a couple of drops of blue Loctite. Then I can attach the transmission to the rest of the drivetrain using the drive shaft for this divorce mount transfer case. Now the drive shaft itself looks like your typical run-of-the-mill light truck drive shaft, just one that's been shortened. And it's all it really needs. The drive shafts don't get really big until after the gear reduction of the transfer case. Now we've installed drive shaft safety loops before, kind of like these. But this shield here was probably bomb-proof, and it's what goes around the drive shaft that goes in between the transmission and the heavy-duty transfer case. This thing is serious. Now this shrapnel tube not only protects the driver from exploding parts, it also keeps flying drive shaft chunks from heading their way into the spectator stands. But it doesn't look like it was ever tested. That's a good thing. Now, in addition to installing the rebuilt supercharged big block and new transmission, we're also going to be updating the fuel system on BigFoot. So we went to Aeromotive and picked up one of their Phantom Universal Electric in-tank pump kits. Our kit includes a 450 liter per hour electric in-tank pump, which is a great match for the power output of the engine. The electric pump hanger has inlet, outlet, and vent ports in a -6 size, and the pump hanger bracket is trimmed to fit so it can be retrofitted into just about any tank. It also includes a fuel-resistant foam baffle and a rubber bladder to assist in fuel pickup. We also got one of their fuel filters and fuel pressure regulators. And to make sure the installation goes smoothly, we picked up enough fuel line and fittings so we can feed the beast under the hood.
Up next, we'll run the fuel lines and then we'll fire it up. Stick around.
Hey guys, welcome back to Truck Tech. Well, we've got our new electric fuel pump installed inside the tank, which is in the truck bed. And we've got the braided stainless steel line passing through an existing hole in the bed floor. And now we can add our fuel filter, plumb the line up to the engine bay, add our adjustable fuel pressure regulator, and get everything plumbed. Now, installation of the fuel filter was really simple because they already had this bracket bolted to the bed floor. So we just simply clamped ours in place. Then added the input fuel line and the output line heading to the engine bay. Then to hang the fuel pressure regulator on the firewall, I'm using one existing hole and making one new one. Then I can add the anodized regulator and start routing lines. Now this heat shielding was on the fuel lines when it came to us, so it's going to go back on the new lines as well. My guess is those headers make quite a bit of heat, so a little bit of heat protection will make sure the fuel doesn't boil on its way to the carburetors. I think we're gonna make it. All right, cool. This is the return line, and this is the feed line. Now to snug the fittings down, I'm using an aluminum AN wrench. Now these are the original braided fuel lines that went from the carburetors to the feed line on the firewall. And years ago, blue and red anodized AN fittings were pretty much all you could get. But the new section of fuel system uses black anodized fittings. So rather than come in here and switch those dozen or so blue and red fittings to black, we're just going to run the original fitting on one end and then just add a black fitting on the other end that attaches to our new regulator. Now, if you've never assembled an AN fitting before, the process is fairly straightforward. And most of the time, you can get the braided line started by hand. If not, Koul Tools makes some pretty cool tools to help you out. You want the braided line to almost bottom out on these threads here. That way it's fully seated before you put the other part in. Slick them on here. Will help this assemble. Make sure you're holding the braided line on the bottom and the fitting at the top is not pushing it out. All right. Now the fittings on either side of the regulator is what is going to feed our 3 carburetors. And they're both regulated pressure. To make adjustments to that regulated pressure, you simply use an Allen key on the top of the regulator and lock it in. Now this braided line is pretty tough, but we still don't want it bouncing around the engine bay. So I'm zip tying the stainless flex line to the stainless hard line of the nitrous system. And after snugging down the zip ties, a razor blade makes sure there's no leftover sharp edges. Hey guys, welcome back to the shop. Well, we've got this monster of an engine mostly underneath the hood of this old Ford. And this engine hasn't been installed in this truck for over 20 years, so it's pretty cool to be able to reunite the two. Now we've got the supercharger hooked up, exhaust installed, fuel system installed, our fuel pressure regulator dialed in, and everything seems to be good to go. So we're gonna dump some fluids into this thing, see if we can make a little bit of ruckus. To fill up the transmission, we're using a couple of gallons of TCI's ATF. AutoZone provided the coolant for the giant radiator, and we went through about 14 quarts of Royal Purple's XPR 20W50 race oil. This thing's thirsty. All right, well, time for the moment of truth. Now, I've got Pat from Engine Power helping me out. He had this thing running on the dyno, so it only makes sense to have him give me a hand get this thing started. Let's give it a shot, man. You ready?
All right, let her rip. Oh, come on, baby.
Ready?
Yep.
Well, that beautiful sound tells me that this project is a success. Now, I'd love to throw the big tires on this thing, take it out on the field, and thrash on it. But it's the original monster truck. Probably not that good of an idea. So if you guys want to see more of this thing, go to BigFoot4x4.com and find out when it's coming to your area. For now, I'm going to give Mr. Bob Chandler a phone call, tell him his pride and joy is ready to be picked up. Now, if you've added larger tires and wheels to your 07 and newer Jeep JK Wrangler, you're probably overwhelming the factory tailgate-mounted spare tire carrier. Well, Mickey Thompson's got the solution for you in the form of their Metal Series rear bumper with optional tire carrier. The bumper has heavy-duty frame attachment points, 3/4-inch D-ring mounts, and rock light ports at either end of it. The spare tire carrier is solidly mounted and opens with the tailgate with one hand. It also locks into position positively until you're ready to close it. They also offer an optional high-lift jack mount and third brake light extension bracket. Everything's powder-coated black, and all their Mickey Thompson Metal Series bumpers and accessories are made in the U.S. Guys, thanks for watching Truck Tech. See you next time.